In this video, I wanted to talk to you about styling. There's a section under Build UI, Template Customizations, Styling CSS that describes various things that are important to understand about the way that CSS works inside of our library. But ultimately, it's just building a DOM. Whenever the templates are rendered, you have the HTML that becomes part of the living document, what you actually have available to you, and then all CSS rules apply at that point, and it's cascading style sheets. So the order in which the CSS is there, how specific a CSS selector is versus another CSS selector, and whether you have important added to a rule and all that kind of good stuff. All of the regular things apply. So one of the things that I wanted to explain was that when you look at the documentation that we have, there are just the same way that we have files that you can access in our template reference to see what the original templates are. There's also CSS to see what the CSS that we're adding to each one of those themes actually is. There's no CSS inside of the Klevu.js, the core file, but there is for the quick search theme, for the landing search result page, and for the cat nav, the category merchandising page. So for those, there's the CSS, which is minified, and then there's also a debug version. That's the one that you should be looking at if you wanted to grab a copy of it and manipulate it. It's up to you. And then there is a way that you can, using the settings, just like we did before with the set templates and the set helpers, you could say, hey, theme, for quick search, load the default styles and set that to false. That way it won't actually execute adding that CSS to quick search, or when it's doing it for landing, same thing, or when it's doing it for cat nav, same thing. You can sit there and say, hey, whenever any one of these is loading, I don't want to add that CSS to the page. I want to show you what that actually looks like. So if I take a look at the quick search debug version of the code, at the very, very, very top, by default, we are calling that same Klevu theme quick search. And then here we're basically saying load default templates, true. Load default styles, true. And then we're going to go ahead and find the body as the template container. And then there's this, which is another helper, part of the Klevu object called extend. It's just a function that merges objects together. And so here we're basically taking the original Klevu object and we're merging it with this other object that has extensions, themes, template, quick, and then it has a CSS property, which happens to have the minified CSS, the same CSS that you'd find if you were to call this document. It's the exact same code. That's where it's at. Same exact thing goes with template. This is that TPL file. So the whole entire TPL thing, it's all minimized or minified, but that is this one variable on this one object, and it's getting merged into Klevu. True at the beginning just says, do you want to do a deep merge? But basically what's happening is that all of this becomes part of what's available to Klevu. And then at some point in time, it's going to then turn around and try to make the decision on whether to load those default styles or not. Based on if you said not to, then that would override this one, and then it wouldn't do it. So if I copy this and go find it, here's the code. It's going to wait for the page to be interactive. Then it's going to do some stuff. And then at some point in time, there's going to be a condition that says if that setting is true, then call this DOM helper that's going to add an element to the head, and type is CSS. So it's going to be a style tag. It's going to have a name of Klevu quick search theme styles. And then the content is going to be that thing that was merged in. So Klevu, and then here's that get object path, the thing that we just talked about in the last video. So it's looking for Klevu extensions, Klevu extensions. And then from there, it's this string that is the path. The path would be theme.template.quick.css. theme.template.quick.css. So if that's there, go ahead and add this thing in, and then you end up with what you end up with. So the name of the thing that's being added is this. If I hit copy and I come back to our demo and I take a look in the elements panel and then I go do a find and I go look for that thing, here is this style tag. It's added to the head. That's exactly what the code said it was going to do. It's this helper that says add an element to the head. The type is CSS. And if I take a look at it, it's got an ID of that. And if I look inside of it, it starts off with this square bracket KU container A, comma, something, something, something. And this one is KU container A, comma, something, 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 something. So it's literally just taking that value, sticking it into this style tag, and then you end up with what you end up with on our page. The reason why I'm explaining this is that, yes, you could go into our documentation and go say, hey, change that setting to false. And if you set that to false, like I will in a second in my demo, I took out all the code that we had earlier just so we can kind of start fresh. But basically, I'm just going to say, don't load the styles. And it still looked like it loaded the styles. It's got something to do with the order of the execution. What I mean by that is that what's happening is that I'm calling this function first. This actually gets executed before the other thing gets executed. So it's a timing thing as far as which one of these is going to run and execute first. Now it's going to have to wait till the page is interactive before it tries to check for the thing, but it is going to, basically what I'm almost positive is happening is that this code is running before, or I'm sorry, it's running after my code is running. Now because this isn't caught in anything, it's really tricky to execute this in the right order. Essentially what you have to do is that you have to let this script load, then inject your JavaScript, this particular JavaScript after that, but it has to be before this Klevu interactive executes. So it has to be before the page is set to interactive. Just out of curiosity, if I said interactive, and I go to core, because again, it's Klevu, so it's a helper function, I can actually go find that interactive. It's in here 42 times. It's probably going to be like the first one. Yeah, so here is this klib interactive thing. It's being called right here. Let's see, where was it? See, this function is core build, and this is something that's happening inside of it. Here's something where it's extending like we were talking about earlier. In this particular case is interactive is false, so that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a function. That's a comment. Interactive fire, nope. Interactive promise, nope. Here it is. So Klevu, I need to extend this particular object with something else that happens to have this interactive on it. And interactive is going to be some function that accepts some object, and then it says start interface dot interactive promise. So then it's going to run that other interactive promise. So anyway, so a little complicated as far as how it's implemented, but if I take a look at this interactive promise, that's probably the logic that's being applied. It's right here, and it's basically just looking for ready state to be interactive. If that's the case, then that's when essentially there's a chain, an interactive chain. That's where the things are being registered to. So whenever you say Klevu.interactive, you essentially, it's kind of like a Klevu a jQuery ready function. But anyway, long story short, you have to be careful with the way that code executes. And because I keep saying this over and over on purpose, the code cascades. So you have to pay attention to when the CSS executes, when the code is running, and all this other kind of good stuff. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because the way that we do a customization is it's just like it is over here in this quick search. So the same helper, this add element to the head type, activity that's happening, and then the content is something that it's just grabbing, but essentially it turns into some string, which is the CSS. That's what's being injected when you're looking at a customization. And not this one, but let me bring this code editor up. This is more than likely what your customization file is going to look like. Something very similar to this. They were done a little bit different here and there, but essentially almost just like the template thing. There's some variable with a template literal string that happens to have the CSS in it. So if I look for this custom style content, there's only two of them. One where it's being set. The other one is where it's actually being added. This one isn't using that helper, but your customization might. It might be using that helper to add an element to the head. In this particular case, there's this function called load custom Klevu styles. There's a try catch. Essentially what it's doing is it's grabbing that template literal string and it's encoding URL component, whatever that function is. It gives me that variable. Then it turns around and turns it into a data text CSS character set UTF-8, and then it's appending the rest of that CSS to it, and that's the data URI. It creates a link element on the page. It sets it relative to style sheet, the type to text slash CSS, and the href is this string plus that CSS. And then it also gives it an ID. Then it turns around and at some point in time when this function runs, it's going to append that to the head. If I take a look at this load custom styles function and I scroll up, it is in again, what we talked about in the last video. I'm doing these on purpose in this order. Klevu, I'm going to pass in this object. I need you to merge it in. Theme, set helpers. For what? Everything, for all of them. Here's all the functions that I want to make available, including this load custom Klevu styles. This is now, because of this code, it is a helper that I could call from Quick, from Landing, from CatNav, or from Rex, from any one of the themes. So I'm going to copy this and go specifically find it. And here is where it's being used. Specifically, it's on Klevu before activation. Quick. So only for Quick. Only when Quick theme is being activated. Here's that function again, that data scope that we looked at. And so sure enough, it's saying, hey, so basically all of this is targeting that Quick. We're saying, hey, go into the template object, get the helpers, get all of the helpers for Quick. One of them is going to be this load custom Klevu styles and just run that function. Then it's going to do a Klevu each. And of what? Of Klevu search, extra search box, whatever that is. And here's that function again. This one's the index. Here's the thing that's being iterated through. We're going to call it box. And then it does this set template, which is this, and again, all of this stuff is Quick. That is what it is. It's looping through the quicks. There might be more than one input on the page. That's the reason why it does it this particular way. Quick is the only one that's like that. but we have to go through each one of them in order to get the scope of the thing, and then go to template and set template. And then this is, again, there's a variable somewhere on this page that is the string that represents this particular template. And which template are we talking about? This Klevu quick product block title header. Here we're doing it for a different one. Here we're doing it for a different one, so on and so forth. But the important part was, here's the CSS. And as I showed you earlier, it does make it into the document. I'm not running that customization in here, so I won't find that particular ID on the document because this customization isn't on that page. But if I was running this customization, you bet your bottom dollar, I'm going to find a link tag somewhere in the head that happens to have this type, this rel attribute, this ID, and if I looked at the href on it, it's going to start off with this, and then it's going to continue on to whatever all this is, because this is the CSS. If you have a customization, feel free to jump in, modify the CSS. Now, the reason why we do this for a customization, why do we add the CSS this way and then use a function to add it to the document? The reason why we do it is because typically we would host the customization, and instead of having separate files, one for your CSS and another one for your JavaScript and another one for your template code and all this other stuff that we could do, it's just easier to bundle it all into one JavaScript function. So we're conforming the templates to be JavaScript variables. We're conforming the CSS to be JavaScript variables using those literal strings, and then turning around and adding them to wherever we need to, or accessing them using the set templates and so on and so forth. But you have to be mindful of when are the default ones being added, because this is also being added somewhere to the head. Unless you say false and you do it at the right time, you will get this this style tag being added to the head. But if you were running your customization, then you would also end up with this link tag being added to the head. If this link tag gets added after the other one, then this would, if there was something in this CSS that overrode the other CSS, then this CSS would win. But the opposite is also true. If this is being added before the other one, then the other one would override this one. And it just gets really tricky because of the cascading nature of style sheets. So you just have to be careful with the way you do it. I would recommend removing, if you're taking over your customization file, I would recommend removing the CSS, adding it to your CSS, but just be mindful to make sure that the CSS selectors that we're using here, for example, one of the things that I commonly do is that if I'm going to override something that is inside of the default CSS, I would just add something to make it a little bit more specific. Because now this one, even if this CSS selector was before, or this CSS itself was added to the document before the default ones, because this one is more specific than the other one, then this one would take more priority, and this would be the CSS style that you would see, which is what you're expecting. So you just have to be careful with how you add your CSS if you want to remove it from this document and add it to your normal CSS. I probably would. But I just wanted to explain that because it's an important concept to keep in mind to make sure that your styles translate properly.